I walked to Volodymyrska Street, to the Opera House in the center of the city. It was 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The day was clear and sunny. I was absolutely amazed by the elegant, cheerful look of the public strolling along the sidewalks, ladies flaunting themselves in silk dresses and mantillas, wearing surviving earrings and brooches. Men in frock coats appeared, several brave figures in guards' uniform, 2 or 3 priests in silk cassocks. There were long unseen former officials and teachers in the uniforms of the times of Nicholas II. Occasionally even the respectable gentlemen of Hetman Skoropadsky, and some suspicious men appeared, similar to city guards or gendarmes. The whole audience was merrily humming, bowing to each other, and only the firmly learned habit of keeping one's mouth shut prevented them from loudly congratulating each other on their liberation from the Bolsheviks. And this is not 1918th year, as one might think. This is how Nadezhda Linka Hepaner described what she saw in the center of Kiev on the first day of the Nazi occupation, the 19th of September 1941, 80 years ago. Greetings, my name is Vladlen Murayev. You are on the channel History Without Myths, where we talk about the past of Ukraine and the world without embellishments and falsifications. Subscribe to our channel and click the bell so you don't miss new videos. Let Ukrainian YouTube develop. One should not be surprised at the high spirits of Kievans, whom Nadia Linka Hepaner saw, because most of those who considered the Soviet government to be their own were either mobilized to the Red Army or evacuated to the east. As a result, in September of the 41st year, 43% of the pre-war population remained in the city, about 400,000 people. Many remembered the Hetmans Kiev of the 18th year and the German military, who were then in the city. They compared the then system with what the Bolsheviks had established. This comparison was not at all in favor of the Bolshevik regime, and let's not even talk about the mood of the few surviving representatives of the imperial elite who were still in Kiev. Even among the Jews there were those who welcomed the arrival of the Nazis. They believed that the Germans would allow them to engage in commerce again. 15-year-old Katerina Krichevska from Kiev witnessed such a scene in front of the Lukyanovsky Bazaar. Our neighbor from a tiny shack, a tailor with many children, a Jew, stood next to us, holding a saucer with a pickle on it. This is how the neighbor greeted the liberators from communism. But these kind-hearted sentiments did not last long. The fate of the Kiev Jews turned out to be the most tragic. The invaders threw the Slavs to the mercy of fate, and when in November the 43rd year the Red Army returned to Kiev, there were no more than 180,000 inhabitants in the city. But the terror of the Nazis was not the main reason for such a radical decrease in numbers. Tens of thousands of Kievans were destroyed by hypermortality due to very difficult living conditions in the occupation. Many young people were taken to forced labor in Germany. Actually, a similar thing happened after the border battles. The Wehrmacht command quickly found weak points in the Soviet defense and delivered major blows to them using tank and mechanized units that quickly advanced, so the Red Army either retreated or was encircled. This blitzkrieg tactic was not new. It was how the Nazis won most of their brilliant victories in Europe, but the Soviet command still did not find anything to oppose the mobile forces of the enemy. Kiev was to be defended by the 5th and 26th Armies of the Southwestern Front led by Colonel General Mikhail Kirponos. Their main opponent was the 6th Army of the Wehrmacht under the command of Field Marshal Walter von Reichenau, the same one that would be destroyed in Stalingrad in a year and a half, but under the command of Friedrich Paulus. In the battles for Kiev on the right bank of the Dnieper, part of the forces of the 1st Tank Group of Colonel General Ewald von Kleist also took part. In the domestic literature, there are still claims that on the 11th of July, Heinz Guderian's tanks were the first to reach the near approaches to Kiev, but this is an unfortunate mistake. In fact, Guderian will still play a fatal role in the fate of the Southwestern Front, but this will happen later. In fact, scouts of the 13th Tank Division from the Kleist Group were the first to enter the border of the Irpin River. From there it was about 20 kilometers to the center of Kiev. The Germans reached the so-called Stalin Line, a series of long-term fortifications built in the 28th, 38th years along the old border of the USSR, After the border moved much further west in the 39th year, this line lost its strategic importance. Most of the bunkers of the Stalin line were not just disarmed, but abandoned, and now they had to be put in order as soon as possible. In addition, in the last days of June, the construction of earthen fortifications on the outskirts of the city began. About 500,000 people were mobilized to dig trenches and anti-tank ditches. Among them there were a lot of women, even school children were taken to work. People worked from dawn to late at night and did the almost impossible. During the week, they dug about 30 kilometers of ditches of the first line of defense, and then another 25 kilometers of the second. In addition, hundreds of wooden and earthen fortifications were erected. Together with the old bunkers, they formed the lines of the Kiev fortified district, which covered the city from north to south with a semi-ring. Nature itself also helped to protect the city. In front of the lines of fortifications lay the marshy floodplain of the Irpin River, which the equipment could practically not overcome, so the main battles began for the Zhytomyr and Odessa highways and the railway line, which could be used to quickly break through to the city center. But the Germans could not immediately take Kiev. Relying on the lines of fortifications, the Soviet troops desperately defended and even counterattacked, so the German command did not spend forces to capture Kiev from the most attractive western direction. Instead, it demonstrated again its art of waging maneuverable war. The main forces were deployed to the south, where the chances of success increased. Here the Soviet command wanted to do the best, but it turned out to be a disaster. According to the directive of Headquarters No. 00509, on the 25th of July, the 6th and 12th Armies were transferred from the southwestern front to the south, but they did it extremely poorly. The command of the troops was violated. They did not receive air support. The result was the Uman Cauldron, in which both armies found themselves. Together they numbered 130,000 personnel. Few managed to escape. According to German data, more than 18,000 people died, and 100 were captured. This defeat immediately complicated the position of the defenders of Kiev, because the left flank of the 26th Army was exposed. On the 30th of July the Germans struck a powerful blow and began to advance along the highway Bielat-Tserkva, Kiev. A week later, battles were already taking place on the southern outskirts of the capital. On the 8th, 9th of August, the crisis reached its apogee. The Germans captured the villages of Lulyany, Pirogov, Myshalovka and a significant part of the Golozevsky Forest. Today these are districts of Kiev. It was these days that the 37th Army was formed from individual units and formations that were within the Kiev fortified area, led by Major General Andrei Vlasov. Then he was considered one of Stalin's favorite generals, although a year later his name became a symbol of betrayal. Nevertheless, the breakthrough of the Nazis managed to be stopped, and to this day, the Soviet tradition is preserved, especially to thank the Kiev Militia and the 5th Airborne Brigade for this. We will not question the courage of engineers and workers, teachers and students who fought for their hometown. However, the combat capability of even a very patriotic militia cannot be compared with the training of regular units. The paratroopers also had no combat experience and were not armed in the best way. But two fresh rifle divisions, which the 37th Army received in a very timely manner, really represented a powerful force, and with the help of these units, on August 11th, the Soviet troops launched a counteroffensive and in 5 days drove the Germans outside the fortified area. It seemed that the crisis was over, but the worst was just beginning. In the south, the Germans had already crossed the Dnipro and created a bridgehead in the Kremenchuk area, but the situation was particularly difficult north of Kiev. Aimed at Moscow, the German Army Group Center advanced far to the east, and it was there that the 2nd Tank Group of Colonel General Guderian played the role of an armored wedge. Now the section of the front defended by Kirponos's troops was a gigantic protrusion directed to the west. Such a configuration threatened to end up in a huge pocket. Marshal Georgy Zhukov claimed that on the 29th of July he offered to withdraw the troops of the southwestern front to the left bank of the Dnieper and leave Kiev. This angered Stalin and cost Zhukov the position of Chief of the General Staff, but this is the version of the Marshal himself, which has no confirmation in other sources. On the 29th of July, Stalin really made a reshuffle, replacing Zhukov with Marshal Boris Shaposnikov. Most likely, he took such a step, irritated by another defeat on the Western Front, because the day before the Soviet troops surrendered the strategically important Smolensk. It cannot be said that the Soviet command was not aware of the threatening situation of the Southwestern Front, but both Stalin and Shaposnikov believed that there were enough forces there to avoid defeat, and Kirponos assured that he would not surrender Kiev. It was not only about the political significance of the capital of Ukraine, because a lost battle for the Dnipro would open the way for the Wehrmacht to quickly capture the entire industrial east of Ukraine. Also, the Soviet command hoped to strike on the right flank of the German Army Group Center, which, due to the rapid offensive to the east, looked too stretched and weakened. These considerations formed the basis of the directive of the Stavka No. 001084 of the 19th of August 41, which determined the further fate of the troops of Kirponos. The front was given the main task: defending behind the Dnipro River on the east bank from Loyevo to Perevoloknaya, in any way to keep Kiev behind us and reliably cover the directions to Chernihiv, Konotop, and Kharkiv. Meanwhile, disagreements arose among the German High Command regarding the further conduct of the Eastern Campaign. The General Staff of the Ground Forces, led by Franz Halder, proposed a solution to achieve victory in the Moscow direction, but Hitler did not agree with this. He looked with caution at the huge Bolshevik group, hanging over the truly stretched right flank of Army Group Center, and in addition, the Führer was greatly tempted, contrary to the opinion of his generals, to win a bright victory in the south. On the 21st of August, Hitler issued Directive No. 441, 412, a fraction of 41, in which he stated, "Our task before the onset of winter is not to seize Moscow, but to seize the Crimea, industrial and coal regions on the Donets River and block the ways for Russians to bring oil from the Caucasus." Halder called this directive decisive for the entire Eastern Campaign. To implement the idea, Hitler ordered to change the direction of action of the main strike forces of Army Group Center. The 2nd Panzer Group of Heinz Guderian and the 2nd Army of Maximilian von Weichs had to be urgently deployed to the south. To put it mildly, many generals were very unhappy with this unexpected decision of the Führer, but Guderian seems to have been most displeased. He recalled his impressions after the meeting on the 23rd of August with Halder's participation. It was obvious to us that Colonel General Halder himself was deeply affected by the fact that his plan for the development of the offensive on Moscow had collapsed. We consulted for a long time whether something could be done so that Hitler would change his final decision. After all, we were all deeply convinced that Hitler's planned offensive on Kiev will inevitably lead to a winter campaign with all its difficulties. Guderian argued ardently that he could not throw one of his 3 corps into the south, but the very next day, under the influence of Hitler, he radically changed his mind, and this greatly surprised Halder. On the 25th of August, the 2nd Tank Group began to move in a new direction. The Soviet command assessed the threat promptly, but attempts to counteract the advance of the enemy troops did not give anything. They managed only to delay the pace of the offensive a little. At the end of August, the situation in the northern defense sector of Kiev worsened. Major General Mikhailo Potapov's 5th Army had to be withdrawn to the left bank. At the same time, it was not without regrettable omissions. The Germans captured the survivors, even a wooden bridge near the village of Okuninov. Moreover, they formed several bridgeheads on the left bank of the Dnieper, and as of September 1st, Major General Potapov's troops were cut off from the northern 21st Army and the southern 37th Army. Over the next 10 days, the 5th Army was actually defeated by the troops of the 6th and 2nd Armies of the Wehrmacht. Its remnants retreated along the Chernihiv-Kiev highway. All the conditions were met for the encirclement of Kiev from the northern direction. On the 10th of September, the forward detachment of Guderian tanks entered the city of Romny. It was the deep rear of the southwestern front. Kirponos immediately asked Moscow for a general withdrawal of his troops. On the night of the 11th of September his conversation with Shaposnikov took place. It was long, but its essence was reduced to one phrase of the Chief of the General Staff. The headquarters of the Supreme Commander believes that it is necessary to continue to fight on those positions that occupy parts of the southwestern front, as provided for in our statutes. In the morning, the commander of the entire southwestern direction, Marshal Semyon Budyonny, made the same request to Stalin. Budyonny gained a reputation as a retrograde strategist, who in the era of motors continued to prefer his favorite cavalry, but in September of the 41st year, this former Unter of the Imperial Army understood the situation better than the former Tsarist Lieutenant Colonel Shaposnikov. In his defense, we can only say that the intelligence data gave reason to believe that small enemy forces had entered the city of Romny, and it was possible to fight against them, and, of course, Stalin's position was important for Shaposnikov. And Stalin contacted Kirponos via special communication and said that he considered the urgent withdrawal of troops dangerous. This can turn into a panicked escape, which threatens with complete defeat. Therefore, first, it is necessary to strike a desperate blow against the Konotop group of the enemy, that is, against Guderian's troops, then create a new defensive line, and only after that think about the evacuation of Kiev. In addition, Stalin demanded, finally stop looking for lines of retreat, and look for ways of resistance. Completely depressed Kirponos did not resist the pressure of the leader. But while the headquarters were thinking, the Germans presented another surprise. They transferred Kleist's first tank group to the Kremenchug bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnieper, and Soviet intelligence missed this maneuver of a huge group. On September 12, the group went on the offensive to the north, to meet Guderian's tanks. On the night of the 14th of September, the Chief of Staff of the Southwestern Front, Major General Vasily Tupakov, sent another operational report to Moscow, which ended with the tragic phrase, "The beginning of the disaster is a matter of several days." In Moscow, this was regarded as a manifestation of panic. In response, Shaposnikov demanded, "It is necessary to convince the entire composition of the front to fight stubbornly without looking back. It is necessary to follow the instructions of Comrade Stalin, given to you on the 11th of September. At 18 o'clock near the city of Lokvitsia, Poltava region, advanced detachments of the 2nd and 1st Tank Groups of the Wehrmacht met, the trap closed. The encirclement was not yet dense. The southwestern front had a chance to break through at least with part of the forces, but Kirponos did not dare to break through without instructions from above. Even when the new commander of the southwestern direction, Marshal Semyon Timoshenko, gave him the appropriate oral instruction, Kirponos was still waiting for Moscow's decision, and it came too late, on the 18th of September. Soviet troops left Kiev on the night of the 19th of September. The 5th, 37th, 26th and separate units of the 38th and 21st Armies were surrounded. They were no longer a single organized force. The Germans divided the Soviet army into smaller pieces and by the 26th of September defeated almost everyone. Only a few groups continued to make their way out of the encirclement even in early October. The headquarters of the Southwestern Front died almost in its entirety during the battle in the Shumakov tract, near the village of Iskivsy in the then Lokvitsky district. Kirponos was killed on the battlefield by shrapnel from a mortar mine. On the 25th of September, the Wehrmacht reported the found body of the fallen Colonel General Kirponos. He was buried on the spot. In December 43rd year the remains of the commander of the Southwestern Front were transferred to the Kiev Botanical Garden named after Fomin, and in the 57th year he was reburied in the newly created Park of Eternal Glory. The pedantic Germans listed the trophies captured during the operation in the Dnieper and Desna basins. This is how the battle for Kiev was called in Wehrmacht documents. In particular, they got 824 tanks, 3,436 guns of various calibers, as many as 665,212 people were captured. but this is taking into account not only the southwestern front, but also those captured in the adjacent areas. Among them was the commander of the 5th, Mikhailo Potapov. According to the data of the Soviet General Staff published in the 93rd year, the total losses of the Red Army during the defense of Kiev exceeded 700,000 people. For comparison, according to an entry in Halder's diary, as of September 26 of the 41st year, the losses of the Wehrmacht on the entire Eastern Front amounted to only 534,970 people. No more than 21,000 commanders and soldiers of the Red Army were lucky enough to escape from the giant pocket. One of these lucky ones was General Andrei Vlasov. Next to him was the Chief of Staff of the Armored Train Konstantin Arefiev. He recalled that they managed to get out on the 2nd of October through the swampy floodplain of the Trubas River. Vlasov received a minor injury and was immediately hospitalized. The Kiev catastrophe of the 41st year went down in history as one of the most terrible defeats. Worse was only at Vyazma, where the losses of the Red Army amounted to 780,000 people, although there are other estimates. If this video gets 20,000 likes, we will make a separate issue dedicated to the defeat of the Red Army in Vyazma in October of the 41st year. It seemed that the Wehrmacht brilliantly implemented the Führer's plan, but in fact none of the strategic tasks regarding Ukraine, set by Hitler in the directive of the 21st of August, was fulfilled. Moreover, the fears of the German generals about the negative impact of this directive on the course of the battle for Moscow were justified, because the Wehrmacht really had to face all the charms of the Russian winter and the inexhaustible reserves of the Red Army. The result is well known. Stalin's stubbornness almost instantly affected the dashing fate of the southwestern front, and Hitler's strategic games led to disastrous consequences for the Wehrmacht a little later. However, both dictators persistently refused to admit their own miscalculations and continued to blame the defeats on incompetent generals. Actually, this tradition still lives in the world. Politicians prefer to attribute victories to themselves, and shift responsibility for defeats to the military. Dear friends, don't forget to subscribe to the History Without Myths channel, like this video, write a comment and share it on social networks. Thank you for watching, see you soon.